Hey, everybody, and welcome to How to Make Films and Influence People with Peter and Andrew, where we talk about our own approach to screenwriting and filmmaking. We discuss great works of cinema, and then we blasphemously imagine how they could be remade. This week, we'll be talking about Godfather Part II, giving an update on our current screenplay project that you, the audience, has been contributing to. But first of all, I'm Peter, successful filmmaker, film professor, and screenwriter, and this is Andrew.
Screenwriter, filmmaker, but not a zookeeper by choice.
This week, we want to update everyone on our screenplay project, making good progress. We're coming up on the end of the year right now, and I think we don't have like a strict deadline for when we need it done by. So I think we just keep chugging along. I think we're focusing more just on the routine of working on it, and less on like the strict deadline to get it done.
We've been working on it for about 6 months now, maybe longer.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that could be, and that's a
From
leisurely pace in some ways, but I think it's working well for all the other things we have going on, and for the I think it's coming out well. So I think there's a certain amount that that benefits just from taking our time with it, and then also we got a lot of life going on.
This isn't the only thing we do. We also have a podcast. I don't know if people know this, but
That's right.
we do that as well. But we started it from nothing, so from like idea conception to now, and just doing an hour, a couple hours a week, really, is all we're doing. Maybe 3 hours a week on the script. It's going pretty good.
That's right. Um, and I think that leads great into a question that we have this week from a listener. This is coming in from Samantha. Who it's a short question, but I think it's a good one. Where do you get your ideas from? And I think it's a it's a it's a very simple question, but I think there's a lot behind that. I think anybody's thinking about writing, thinking about what kind of ideas they want to write about. Where do you get those ideas from? And there are a couple different ways to think about that. But what comes to your mind, Andrew, when you hear that question?
First thing I think of is my life, which now that I think about it, I don't think is that interesting. So there must be something else that I'm getting ideas from. I think it's what I do a lot of times is whenever I think of something that's funny or an observation that that I think is interesting, I write it down in my notes app on my phone, and a lot of times that like will spark something bigger of just like a random thought or random idea that I just thought was funny or interesting in any way, and then it kind of snowballs from there. That's how I've gotten a lot of ideas, at least. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes I've done different projects where somebody hired me to write something, and so where did I get the idea from? Well, the producer said this is what we want the script to be about, or this is the book that you're adapting, and there's the idea. But I think when you're talking about you're writing something of your own, and even if you're adapting something else, you're working with someone else's idea. There, you still have to come up with ideas for how's the story going to move forward, what kind of events are going to happen, how's the scene going to play out. But if you're really talking about like where to start with the story, I think everything you said makes a lot of sense. One thing that I also like to do is watch movies and read books. My wife reads an enormous amount of books. Uh, I kind of half read the ones that she reads in that I read a little of them and then she tells me all about them. So I absorb a fair amount of those books. I read a fair amount too, though, but I think often I will think, okay, so this is something that happened in this story, or this is something that happened in history. What if it had gone a little differently? What if
Mm.
we start there, but if instead of this that happened, or okay, here's the story that we all hear from the history book, but I wonder how the other guy felt. That kind of idea, I think, just exposing yourself to different ideas, different stories, whether it's fictional or nonfiction. I think then just let your mind wander and think of where you would go creatively with that.
And I think when we got the idea for the story we're writing now, we just kind of pitched each other on here's some ideas I had for movies. We sent them back and forth. And then the idea we landed on was kind of a mixture of our ideas and then kind of like a few steps removed from the original idea. So just talking to somebody else about the idea, kind of spitballing ideas, and then, you're like, oh, I like that one. And you kind of go from there. So I think a lot of ideas can be worked out as you discuss it with other people, even if they're not, screenwriters, if they're just friends or somebody in your life, just to talk it through can help as well. To be like, oh, here's another perspective on that idea and how it could possibly pay out. And does it sound interesting to anybody else as well? That could be another way to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think there are a lot of, I think it can be useful also to have an awareness of writing structure, story structure, especially if you're talking about a screenplay. There's a book called Save the Cat that lays out story structure in a very simple way, maybe too formulaic, but I think it's a good starting place. And then you can think about, with that formula, how do you make it actually feel alive and organic? But I think if you have a sense for how stories are structured, then you can immediately start thinking about, here's my basic idea that came up, while I was in the shower, while I was reading this book, while I was talking to a friend. But here's the basic idea. Now that I am thinking about that in the context of how a story should be structured, let me then think about the next step, the next step, the next step. Where would you go with that story? I've had a lot of conversations with people who, they felt like they had a great idea for a story, and it could have been a great idea for a story, but basically all they had was a very basic premise, and they had no idea where you would then go with it or what the characters would do. And I think that's an important thing to understand, so that you can know, is this just a one-off interesting idea, or is this a story that I can actually write and make into a good script?
Yeah. Is there 10 minutes of something here, or is there going to be 2 hours of some substance to this idea? That's also, yeah, a good thing to look for. Because you've all seen movies where the premise is great, and then after like 30 minutes, you're like, oh, this just isn't as fun anymore. It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah,
That's actually interesting, you know? So that's another thing to consider.
definitely. Okay, well, thank you for the question, and please, listeners, keep them coming. We love talking about how great we are, but we love even more talking about the act of screenwriting, filmmaking, and answering your questions. So please keep them coming. Reach out to us, and we'll let you know how our progress on our script goes. And now, Andrew, what have you been watching before we get into our film of the week? Let's just catch up on latest latest stories passing before your eyes. What have you been watching?
Latest movie I watched was a movie called 2046. It's by Wong Kar-wai, and it's supposedly a sequel to his movie In the Mood for Love, which I feel like a lot of people are familiar with, even if you've never seen it. But so it takes place in Hong Kong. He's a Chinese director. I want to say he does a lot of movies that take place in Hong Kong, which is a very cool place to film. I think one of the great film, like if you're going to make a movie and put it in a city, Hong Kong has to be high on the list of like just cool cities to film in. But I like this director. Also did Chungking Express, which people might be more familiar with. Um, but he does a lot of these stories where it's kind of revolves around a romance or like some relationship, and a lot of his movies seem to like have two different parts and two different people, and the stories just kind of go like you just find yourself in the middle of conversation in a place, and then he does a lot of these voiceover narrations, which I think is interesting. He uses it very heavily, and I don't think a lot of people don't do this, but in his movies, just because he puts you in a place, and then he kind of just has to catch you up of just the basic info, so you know where you are, and so you can just kind of get involved in this scene. And I think he's a very interesting filmmaker in the style and the way that he does this. In this movie, 2046, he does a lot of that as well, where it's always close-ups, maybe a medium shot, and it's a lot of conversations and a lot of details. And if you don't know the big picture, he'll fill you in on it. But it's really just about these intimate close up shots of people that are very, he takes his time and sets it up. and it's about a feeling and kind of the vibe behind it, and then a lot of it is about relationships, and this one in particularly so. Are you familiar with Wong Kar-wai?
I'm familiar with Wong Kar-wai. Yeah, I haven't seen 2046, but I think, but yeah, he's great visual filmmaker. And I've been to Hong Kong. It's a beautiful. So there's an escalator that goes up the middle of the city. It's a fun.
See,
Hong
that's so
Kong's a pretty
cool.
cool place. Yeah.
We need that in our cities.
Great, great. Well, that's a good one. Well, I'm taking your word for it that that's a good one, but I know he's a good
Yeah, it was
filmmaker.
really good.
I watched two new films this week. I saw Eternity and
Yeah.
Wake Up Dead Man. And Wake Up Dead Man is the third Knives Out movie with Daniel Craig as the Benoit Blanc mystery detective. So it's sort of, if you
Mhm.
saw Knives Out or the sequel, this is very similar in that it's just a classic kind of Agatha Christie style mystery. And I thought it was really clever. I mean, I think there was something about the first Knives Out that seemed
Yeah.
so exciting to have, like a good old fashioned mystery. I also think some of the details of how that one played out just worked really well. And this third one, I think is fine, and I think it's fun. I think it checks off all the boxes you need from a mystery. But and maybe if this one had been the first one made of the three, it would have stood out just as
Uh,
much. I'm not sure, but it's a little bit. It feels to me like it's not bringing in something fresh and exciting quite the same way that the first one did.
hmm I loved the first one. I thought it was a great movie. I was really excited for that second one. I think it was Glass Onion. It
Yeah,
came out during COVID, I think. And that was fun too. I haven't seen the new one yet though.
yeah. Glass Onion came out during COVID, and it was a rare film that actually dealt with COVID, and it was like
Yeah,
the
the mask they were wearing.
it was sort of a plot point how that was going
Yeah.
down. But the Wake Up Dead Man, it deals a lot with religion and faith, and I think
Not
uh,
as good as
not as good as the first one. I think, and maybe it has particularly interesting ideas to you. I mean, I think the idea of someone struggling with faith, someone finding faith, questions of, what is religious belief versus doing things for personal gain versus refusing to believe in something because of your stubbornness. I mean, I think there are all sorts of interesting ideas that come up. So I definitely think it's worth a watch, but I didn't love it as much as the first one.
yeah.
And
There's also not a lot of movies that do like the mystery thriller, that type of a movie. There's not a lot of those. So if you're looking for that, I think it'd be probably a fun time.
absolutely, absolutely, and I think there is a big appetite for that kind of story, and so I think this totally delivers on that. And so,
Yeah.
especially if you're seeing it straight on Netflix, I think people will be very pleased with it. It's I don't know that it's going to win Oscars or be groundbreaking, but very enjoyable. I saw
Yeah.
Eternity also, which has a really interesting premise, which is old old couple, old man and woman are married. They both die. He dies first, and but when she dies, she now has to choose between spending eternity with him, her husband, and her first husband who died in the Korean War 70 years earlier, uh, and
Mhm.
who has been waiting for her this whole time. And I think that's a fascinating, getting going along with the Knives Out kind of faith religion questions. All sorts of interesting questions come up about the afterlife and what is eternity and all of that. I think there are all sorts of questions one could think about in a serious way. I don't feel like this movie really does, though. I feel like the afterlife that it
Mm.
depicts is kind of ridiculous, and doesn't really hold up to any kind of scrutiny, unless it secretly is that they're all in hell, which is not what the movie says it is. But it's like
Right.
this is this doesn't make any sense. Um, and so I think it's kind of fun, but I found it just sort of frustrating. It was sort of more frustrating because it had such an interesting central question that I then thought it didn't really deal with in a very interesting way. So that was a little
Mm,
frustrating for me.
like a great premise that just doesn't deliver. Because it sounds like a
Yeah,
really good premise. Like it'd be
I think it's a
interesting,
great
but
premise, and I would recommend going to see Defending Your Life with Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep. That is a classic. That's a great film with a similar kind of concept of
oh,
uh,
really?
sort of a. It's not quite the same premise, but it's basically he dies, and now the afterlife is not at all what he expected, and he has to sort of go on trial to defend how he lived his life.
Uh,
I think that
yeah.
one is very funny, very fun, while also being a little bit more thoughtful about life and eternity and all of those questions. Whereas I thought eternity was just a little silly and was a little frustrating because of that. Okay, well, so Wake Up Dead Man, I think gets a qualified go. Check it out. You'll enjoy it if you enjoy mysteries. Eternity, I would probably skip, but I would recommend Defending Your Life. And 2046, what's your verdict on that?
Definitely watch it. I would watch In the Mood for Love first, which I think is an even better film, an all time great film from him. But this was a great one.
And we'll be right back after this.
I'm going to tell you something, Peter. Ice cream is good.
And the best ice cream is Dunkin' and Bliss.
And did you know that Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream is now available nationwide?
Wait, nationwide? That's like the whole nation.
Indeed, it is.
That means anyone can try their famous flavors like Fat Boy Butterscotch, Fudge the Police, Peach Better Have My Honey, and there's always ice cream in the banana stand.
You know, some people say Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream cures depression. Not Dunkin' and Bliss, they legally can't.
And other people have said Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream made them a better person.
It's certainly done that for you.
Try Dunkin' and Bliss ice cream today. It's not just for fat people. And we are back. Okay, so that brings us to the film of the week that we're going to be discussing. We discussed previously The Godfather, and this week we're talking about The Godfather Part II. So, Andrew, what can you tell us about it?
In the continuing saga of the Corleone crime family, a young Vito Corleone grows up in Sicily and in 1910s New York. In the 1950s, Michael Corleone attempts to expand the family business into Las Vegas, Hollywood, and Cuba. And this really is a continuation of the first movie. I feel like it picks up very close after. I think they said maybe it was 6 or 7 years after the first one. I can't remember. It starts off with a very similar opening scene where they're at it's not a wedding, but a communion for his son, but it's a whole group of people together and they're in Tahoe this time instead of New York City. But it follows a very similar pattern, I feel like, at least in the beginning of, setting up the family, showing Michael Corleone is now taken the place of his father. And we kind of go from there, a continuation of that story from that point on, with these flashbacks as well to the backstory of Vito, um, which is an interesting choice for any movie to do. And for this one, I think it does work, but it is an interesting way to tell this story with the back and forth between the 50s and the early 1900s and the two different people.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story construction. We talked about how The Godfather 1 is already an interesting story structure. In contrast, it seems so traditional because it's basically just,
Right.
telling a story chronologically. But it was interesting because is it the Vito story or the Michael story? And then in Godfather Part 2, it's literally telling two different stories at two different periods of time. And in one sense, it's not even a flashback because there's no person who's flashing back to the past. It's
True.
just we are going to tell two stories overlapping, the Vito story and the Michael story. And it's sort of one, and I think one question, I'll put it out there, but we'll come back to it, I think, later on. But is how does this compare to the first movie? Is this better? Is this worse? And in what ways? But it is interesting to me with the Vito story and the Michael story. We see Vito build the family and build the family business and build the empire in the sort of flashback or in the earlier version of the story. And then we see Michael largely dealing with the family falling apart. His
Hmm.
father's already died. His brother Sonny is already dead. Fredo meets his fate in the course of the movie. Their mother dies in the course of the movie, and the
Hmm.
business doesn't die, but it's going through really hard times. And so it's an interesting structure of the movie that it's like the rise and fall of the family business, but in the Vito story, it's only the rise. We don't see the rise and fall
Right.
of Vito. We just see the rise of Vito. And in the Michael story, we only see the fall of Michael. We don't really see. Um, we, I mean, in the first movie, we saw more him rising to power, but this movie is all about things collapsing around him. Whereas with Vito, it's just about him building it up. And so it's interesting that, especially with the Vito part of it, I'm so used to seeing a story where, okay, there's going to be the successful time, and then eventually things are going to go badly
Right.
for him, and it's going to fall apart. But it never happens to the Robert De Niro Vito character. He just ends on a good note.
That's what I was thinking while watching this was like these almost feel like two different movies. You know, you have the one Vito, and that feels like its own thing, and you have Michael with its own thing. Obviously, thematically, they intertwine very heavily. But then, thinking about it afterwards, I'm like, if you just took the one, if you just took the Vito story, that's not a movie because it's just, one direction. There's no, I mean, there's kind of a conflict when he kills a few people, but like, it's all good stuff that happens to him. He gets what he wants. It's all his rise. And with Michael, if they took that Vito story out, this would be such a depressing movie. I feel like it'd be a really hard watch, and you'd just be watching these bad things happen and just no joy. And like you wouldn't feel any excitement really. It's just kind of like it's almost dread. That whole section of the movie just feels very heavy and weighty. And like there's so many problems that he's dealing with, and he just doesn't look happy. But you have the Vito story to balance that out. And so it's almost like on their own, either both stories like aren't enough on their own, but together they do make this perfect match. And it's just so like I don't know how they thought of that. At what point in the process were they like, we got to combine this just to make the one overarching story work? And you have these two storylines that don't work on their own. I feel like, like on their own, I don't think it's enough if you just separated the two into their own movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Michael story in particular would be pretty glum. I mean, it's basically he's not even really trying to do anything that productive. It's basically
Mm.
just fending off attacks. And I guess he's trying to expand into Cuba, but that pretty quickly shows that it's not going to be very successful. And part of the whole Cuba going to Cuba thing is so that he can find out who was trying to kill him and his wife. And so it's not even like he's really trying to build something. I mean, I guess, and then he's also fending off attacks from the U.S. government, and so there's he's being active. It's not like he's a passive character in the story, but he's actively defending himself more than he is actively building up the empire. Whereas we see the Vito story and he's actively building something. I feel like you could have just the Vito story, but I
Yeah,
don't think you would want just the Michael story.
right. That's what I feel like they were continuing the Michael story, and they're like, we need something else to balance this out. I don't know if that's how they did it, but if you draw from this well of Vito, very interesting character, it adds a lot because, like you were saying with Michael, in this movie, he does feel like he's not like he's just dealing with situations, with events, with things that happen, and then he's reacting to them. But like in the first movie, it was clearly he is one thing at the beginning, then he changes, and then by the end of the movie, he's something different. Whereas in this movie, he's one thing at the beginning and he's pretty much the same person at the end. It's just his situation has changed. Like things have gotten worse in his situation. But he's not a good dad in the beginning. He's still not a good family man. He's a pretty cold-hearted, cutthroat guy in the beginning. He still is that in the end. He has the one thing on his mind the whole movie. So his personal growth really isn't as involved in this movie. It's more of just how would this person deal with all these situations that come up, deal with all the betrayal. And that's a whole different type of movie, I feel, than the first movie. Like the focus of it just feels very different.
In the first movie, Michael comes back as a war hero. He's not the one who's destined to lead the family. It looks like that's going to be Sonny, and we're sort of torn between seeing that Michael would be a better leader, but also us wanting him to be legitimate and not join the family business. But when he does take over the family business, we see that that makes a lot of sense. But I feel like in this movie, he just feels trapped. It doesn't seem like he's taking any joy in leading the family. It doesn't seem like he has these grand dreams for it. It just seems like he is fulfilling his obligations, and it seems like the Robert De Niro character has a little bit more fun with his position. I'm sure Sonny would have had more fun with his position,
Right.
but Michael just seems sort of trapped by obligation in this role.
He does. What's interesting about the way that he's portrayed, or Al Pacino plays him, I think he does a great job playing him. Because in every situation with business, he doesn't reveal anything. He's not playing, like, showing his hand in any way. He's very calm and collected. But the only time he freaks out or loses it is when it deals with his family. When he asks about what Tom got his son for his birthday, when he talks to his wife, and then, have the whole scene about her having an abortion. Anytime where it's dealing with his family, he like loses his temper, he loses his control, and you're like, oh, he does not have this all figured out. Whereas when he's with business, you kind of think like, okay, he knows what's going on here. He's playing these people. He's got the upper hand in all of this, even if it doesn't look like it. He's just not showing his hand. And you kind of believe that he's really good at this business part, which he is. But then you see the family part and you realize he has nothing under control and he's a complete wreck in this side of his life. And I think that conflict within him is kind of driving it, because with Vito, he did the business well and his family life was really, well put together. Everybody loved him. All his kids, adored him. He had a good wife that was supportive, at least from what we've seen. And it seemed like his family life was a happy life, this kind of place of peace for him. And with Michael, it's the complete opposite. It's like that's where all of his stress comes from, is his family. And it seems like he's only actually happy when he's doing business, or that's the only place he's comfortable, is doing business. And it's almost like a reversal and I think that's kind of what this movie is showing, how Michael ends up alone at the end, and, Vito started alone. And so you have that full circle of how they kind of cross paths, and, Michael just ends up being where Vito was at the beginning, and that powerful scene at the end of this movie where Michael's alone at the table, which just hits so hard as kind of a completion of the story and his life. But it is, it's sad. It's just kind of depressing to watch that, even though it's very powerful and, a perfect end to that story.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Michael just doesn't seem to enjoy it, and I don't. I think when in the early times when the Robert De Niro character, Robert De Niro Vito, like we don't necessarily see the Marlon Brando Vito in the first movie having fun with it necessarily, but I think Robert De Niro, when he's coming into power, we see him really enjoy that, and it seems like
Yeah,
at
he
no point do
smiles.
we see that kind of enjoyment from Michael.
Right. And the story, I think, is different here as well, because he's not on the up and up. I think retaining power, like holding on to power, is a different game. And I mean, Vito obviously did that for years until the day he died. But this movie also just seems bigger and more of an epic, in the sense of like you get these scenes. He's working now with the senator or a congressman or somebody who's there, and he has to go before a Senate for a hearing, which kind of takes you out of it. He's part of this Cuba uprising. So you've got these like big world events and these big like his stage is not just New York City or this borough. it is now the world. He's playing these games that are so much bigger, dealing with governments, agencies, going to out of the country and back, where it just feels like a lot bigger, grander story than the first movie, which felt much more contained and more personal, of like watching a person and this family. And this is like watching a huge business, like going from a family business to like $1 billion industry. That's what this kind of feels like, the difference in what you're watching, which is fun, but just in a different way, interesting in a different way. And I think he deals with that differently than his father would have.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing you said about the way that Michael deals with family makes me think the way that women are depicted in the film. It's
Mm,
interesting. And the men's, I mean, I don't think there were any women involved really in, uh, designing the film or in, directing, producing, writing. I'm not sure exactly if there were at some
yeah,
level, but
you know that.
uh, Mario Puzo, Francis Ford Coppola, men. Um, but it's interesting. The movie's mostly about men. There are a few female characters, but it's interesting the men's relationships with women. And I think just on one level, I think Vito has the happiest marriage in the movie or
Hmm.
in the family. And I think we see that he actually loves his wife and that she is supportive of him and that he cares about supporting her. And it seems like they have the most real marriage. And then we have Michael, who is not doesn't seem to be cheating and sleeping around. Seems to be, I mean, he did marry someone else in the first movie, but he largely seems to be faithful to Kate. But at the same time, we see him at the end of the first movie when she's like, she asks him a question. He says, I'll tell you the truth one time, and then he lies to her. And then in
Yes.
this movie, when they're arguing, and there's one scene, well, they're big arguments, but he just yells over as if like he's done. She can't, like, he is single-handedly ending the discussion, and that's kind of his relationship with her. So even though in many ways it's then the second best marriage, I think there's some real problems there in that relationship, and I think how much they love each other, how much Michael values her, I think that is an issue. But we also see with Sonny and Fredo, the other two
Hmm.
sons, they they don't have. I mean, I think Sonny is married, but he's obviously cheating and sleeping with a lot of different women and doesn't seem to take anything seriously with women. Fredo, I think, isn't married at all. He just has various different girlfriends. And
Yeah.
there's something interesting about that. I wonder, not in like a progressive feminist really modern approach, but I think maybe more of an old school, maybe Italian kind of approach, but that uh, if you're going to be a successful man, you need to have a good marriage, you need to have a good woman there, you need to be good to the woman in your life, and that is, you know, even if it's patriarchal and sexist, that is still essential for a successful man. And if you don't even hit that bar, you're not even going to be successful as a man. And it seems like we don't see many examples of people being successful who don't have a good relationship here.
With the kids, I think look at Vito's relationship and they see this ideal of what they need. They look at, that's their dad. This is what you should have. And so they try to force this relationship with getting a wife, kids, getting married just to have what their dad had as a way of just showing, in the family, this is how you do it. This is what's important. And I think with Michael, deep down, he sees his failure with his family as like a real personal issue because his dad didn't have that. And so I think that's part of the pressure that's weighing on him is that aspect of it that he can't handle. And all the other kids, they have the same issues. None of them seem to be stable in life at all, um, but they grew up in that privilege in that household. So I think that's interesting, thinking about how kids are raised with privilege and money compared to Vito's situation with nothing, having his family murdered and then coming up from nothing.
There's in the TV show Succession. There's a whole discussion about basically the father grew up in going through all these horrible situations and eventually made himself incredibly wealthy, and then has raised his children in incredible wealth, and then sort of resents and hates them for being so spoiled. And I
Yeah.
think that's we don't see that from Vito, but I think that there's something. I think that that is going to cause a lot of challenges, and that it's a tricky thing as a parent of like helping your children, providing for your children, but then not crippling them with what you give them. So
Well, and then
I
there's the sense of at the end of the movie, you have that dinner scene where it's kind of a flashback to, I guess, before the first movie, really. But all the kids are grown up and they're at dinner. And then Michael's like, oh, I'm going into the military. And Tom's like, your dad has plans for you. He's like, well, what about my plans? What do I want? And so you do get a sense of there was some tension with how the dad ran things. Maybe Michael resented that a little bit in his dad. He wanted to do his own thing, his own way. I'm not sure, but it does kind of set up this idea that Michael, from the beginning, wanted to do things his own way, make his own decisions, and maybe had his eye on this the whole time, which is another interesting aspect of the whole situation.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting in that scene that Fredo is more supportive of Michael, and I
Yeah,
think there's an interesting element there that like on the one hand, Fredo also isn't cut out for following the family path, and so maybe he relates to Michael. But I also think that Fredo is the kind of person who would have just done so much better in life if he hadn't been put in this situation.
right.
Like he's a decent guy who is not cut out for the life that they're living, and that's fine for most people. You're not supposed to be cut out for that, but in this family it makes him a failure, and I
Hmm.
think that's a really tough part of this.
You also wonder from that scene, like, what if Sonny hadn't have died? How would things be different? That's what I was wondering. Because Sonny just seems like he's got the personality, the charisma, like he seems like the natural leader of this family. And I'm sure that would have been a conflict there with him and Michael. But yeah, I kept wondering, what if he, as the oldest kid, just kept it going? Different, I guess, would be a different timeline, different reality for this.
Yeah, makes me think also of like the Kennedys, where I forget what the oldest son's name was, but John was not the oldest one. The oldest one, who was supposed to
Mm.
be the big sort of heir, died in World War II, I think, and so John
Uh,
then stepped up, and then and then there's Robert and Ted, but there's something to that also of like the family plan getting upset, and that's another sort of family empire also met with tragedy, and can't I don't think Coppola could have been unaware of the Kennedy family when he's thinking about this.
no, yeah. That's, yeah. I mean, this is all fictional, but I'm assuming he's basing it on real people, bits and pieces from different people, different mob families, different families in general that have a lot of power. So
Yeah.
that was there.
Okay, so getting back to the big question, Godfather 2 or Godfather 1, where do you land? Which is the stronger film?
For me, it's Godfather 1, and feel pretty strongly about this. I much prefer the story to Godfather 1. It does feel more kind of intimate. It's about there's character development, and it's more contained in one area. And I do feel like the story is just so well done from beginning to end. It all matches up perfectly, and I just like that style of story better. And it's more fun to watch the rise to power than it is to fall to power. Just in general, I feel like, and yeah, structurally overall, I in the performances, I do miss Brando in this one. I just think, like at the end of Godfather 2, and Brando walks in the door, off screen, and you're like, oh, I want to see him. Like, I really felt like I need to see this guy again. Like, I
Mhm.
feel like his character is so good that I really miss that. Like, it just adds something to these movies. So for me, it's number one. Although number two is, unarguably just a great film. Really well done.
Yeah, I liked Bruno Kirby, who's in the Vito scenes with Robert De Niro. I thought they were both good
Yeah.
together, but
Hmm.
I felt like a lot of the characters that we see filling up the Michael storyline are just not as dynamic and interesting to me as in the first one, as Sonny and Vito were, and the Pentangeli.
Yeah.
These are not quite as dynamic characters to me. So I really prefer the first one. I find the second one to be a very thoughtful, very smart movie with a lot of interesting ideas. And what a fascinating structure that it has. What a crazy approach to being a sequel and a prequel at once. I mean, I
Hmm.
think it's doing so many interesting things. But I do find it I think I agree with everything you're saying. I also just find the second one a little bit more boring. And that's not always a terrible thing from a movie. It just sometimes means you just got to put in the effort for it. But I think one of the things that I love about the first film is that it's both really thoughtful and smart and entertaining.
Hmm.
And I feel like the second one is not as entertaining. And I feel like that makes it hard for me to then love it quite as much.
Yeah. Just find myself enjoying the first one easier. It's like it's more of an effortless watch, the first one. This one, there's a lot more to it.
Yeah. My wife walked in the room as I was watching this and she was like, it just looks so brown. Just the
Yeah.
the palette of like they're shooting the 70s in. It's just like so like washed out brown. It's like, oh yeah. It's not fun hippie 70s. It's like we're in the 70s, but we're still dressed. I guess it's the 50s, but
The
it's
50s, yeah. Filmed
but
in the
it's
70s, about the 50s.
right.
So it'd be like something filmed now about the early 2000s.
That's right. A lot less Christina Aguilera in this one than I would have expected in that. But
Yeah.
okay, so I think we both come down Godfather 1 over Godfather 2, but Godfather 2, great film, worth watching. But now, if it needed to be remade, if Hollywood came to us and said, "We want to make it but as a family movie," what would you do? How would you approach that?
I feel like this movie is even less family friendly than the first one, especially the Michael story. It's just so dark, and there's really not a lot of positivity to this. I do like the Vito story in this movie with his backstory and the growing up. I feel like there's you could do a family friendly version of that story. You have a kid who is orphaned, leaves Italy, comes to America, and makes it. And maybe you don't show him like growing up and assassinating people. There's a different way to power. Um, but that story feels like a very uh, American story, a story that kids can relate to, and I think would be, with a few tweaks, you could do a lot with that time period specifically. Even that character going from Italy to America at that time would be a really interesting story that you could do family friendly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was thinking about this, and I think this is one of the most adult films I've seen in the sense of like the ideas and themes of the movie
Mhm.
are just so adult and like the idea of the siblings betraying each other. It's like you want to have the message that the siblings should get along, but nope. Fredo betrays Michael. Michael has Fredo killed. I mean, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. And then even some of the other points, like I was thinking about Vito when he first rises to power, and he has this conversation where he convinces the guy who's trying to extort him to take less money, and he recognizes in the man weakness, and the guy's, I mean, he recognizes the fact that this man is willing to accept less money shows that he's weak and shows that Vito can then take advantage of that and take over.
Mhm.
And I'm like, that's great for Vito succeeding. But as a message, the idea like, don't respect people's niceness, look at that as weakness and take advantage of them. It's like,
Right.
that's a harsh message to send. Um, but I guess my thought for a family movie was, again, getting back to the question of like, what is this movie? And there's so many ways to think about it, define it. But I thought the structure of the movie, if you wanted to recreate that, I thought that could be a fun approach to a family movie. Like, what if you had a family farm or a family olive oil business or something, but like you
Right.
have some kind of family, let's say a farm, and we're seeing both how your dad built it and how he, like, we're cutting back and forth from your dad in the early days trying to build up this farm and now the younger person trying to keep the farm going, and the challenges that they face are, challenges, and we learn to overcome our challenges, but we're coming together as we have less of the family trying to kill each other and less of the Cuban Revolution and all of that stuff. But the idea of we're tracking these two different storylines that sort of connect about one generation building something and the next generation trying to keep it going. I think that could be an interesting family movie.
Yeah. I think that would work. Had to be about olive oil though, instead of crime.
Yeah, yeah. This is the actual legitimate version of this. Um, okay, now if you had to do it on no budget.
So at first I was thinking you could do, they have this, the opening scene is in Tahoe and he's got this whole compound there. I think you could do a lot of Michael's version of this story if he stayed there in that compound and different people came and went from him. And you could, if you don't want to shoot and all over the world, they go to Cuba and they're in Miami and all over the place. So maybe there's a version, the family all lives there. You could have a lot of like family dynamics and becomes much more of a relationship issue of how he's dealing with the fallout now that his dad died and his brother died. And I think that could work, on a small level. But I was also thinking if you could just recreate that street from the Vito story of this, the early 1900s, if you had that
Mhm.
street to work with and like that set, you could do so much fun stuff on that set with that story. If you had the money for that, I think that'd be the more interesting story and a lot more fun to do. Have everything play out there.
That's a great idea. That would be fun. And I guess my thought also was kind of similar in the sort of isolating it to one location. I was thinking, I don't know. I mean, this would be changing the story a little bit, but if you set it maybe in Sicily
Mm,
and you had, I mean, Michael goes to Sicily in the first one, so I don't know if you take from that, but Michael is building something in Sicily. He's doing the next generation in Sicily, and meanwhile, Vito came from Sicily. I mean, I don't think you would do this as 3 hours if you were doing it for no budget. So you'd have to tell a smaller version of the story. But I do think the idea of if you were in the same place and you saw the father go through that place, and then you see also the son go through that place. I think that through line would be an interesting connection between the two parts, and it would mean you'd only need one location for all of that. So I don't know exactly what the story would be because it doesn't cleanly map onto what the story is here. But I think it could. I mean, there's something about the Vito having to flee from Sicily. He's going back to Sicily to build up his empire, but also to get revenge. And then Michael is trying to expand. If you just took the Cuba storyline and moved it to Sicily,
Sicily, yeah.
I think maybe that could work.
And that's a really fun place to film as well. I did like the Sicily scenes. It feels more old style, but the back and forth in the same area, that would be kind of cool to do that.
And then what about the TV version? Whether it's a sitcom, whether it's a Netflix 10-part series, what would you do for the TV version of
The
this?
sitcom would be funny. The I think if you did a Netflix series, I would love to see a series on this Vito backstory. of the early 1900s from Italy onwards, I think I could have watched another hour of that. Like, and just see where he goes from there and to continue the rise and fall. I like those characters. I thought his friends in that story were a lot more interesting and dynamic. And I think you could do a lot with that. Like if you just like, Godfather, before the Godfather or something like that, and just did that story as a Netflix series or whatever, that could be really cool, I think.
Yeah, like the Young Indiana Jones, but for the
Right.
Godfather.
The young Vito. That would be cool.
I think that would be cool, and I think that probably would be the way that I would most enjoy it. I think it would be very weird. I mean, you would need a lot of seasons to grow from one to the next if you were going to tell the old story and have it continue. I don't think you can realistically plan on a show lasting 10 seasons to get there. So that's a little crazy. And I'm not sure how it would work to be cutting back and forth between, like, I don't think it would work that well.
In a series to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, there are series
Just one
where
story.
people are
Pick
cutting
one.
back and forth in their own life a little bit,
Hmm.
but like the show Yellow Jackets has, like, it'll flash from the past experience to the present experience, but it's the same people. It's not telling two totally different stories.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that there'd be a good way to hold on to that. So maybe it would just be, let's just watch the Vito story in the past. And did you ever watch the show The Nick?
No, I haven't seen that one.
It's like a turn of the century New York hospital drama
Okay.
about, like, Clive Owen is like a surgeon in 1900 or something like that. And so it's an interesting idea to like set a show back then and just follow the people there. So I think that probably would make the most sense if you were
It's a
going to
fun
do it.
time period. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you just took this movie and made it 8 hours long instead of 3 hours long and kept going back, I don't think
There's a
I
version that would work, but you'd really have to expand Michael's story into something more. I think if you got a lot more details, maybe you spend some more time in Cuba, because there's just not a lot of like character development in that to really guide it. There's a lot of you could do a lot more situations maybe. I don't know. I feel like you'd need something good to happen, you know, like like
yeah,
to move
it
the
would
plot.
be maybe an interesting approach to do like the American Horror Story approach of, or True Detective approach of, like, anyway, of like a different story every season, but changing it so that it's like we're gonna do the Vito story one season, and then the next season, we're gonna do 8 episodes of just Michael, and
Mm,
then the next season
you do
we're gonna
Sunny.
do Sonny.
Yeah. Yeah,
I don't
that
know
would
that
be
it would work
interesting.
though.
I don't know if it'd work, but that's an interesting idea that has some potential to it, especially because people know these characters already. So
Yeah,
maybe you could do something like that.
yeah. It'd be interesting also to see like Fredo as the hero of the story. Like, what
Yeah.
would that look like if Fredo was somehow? He's just such a
Well,
classic fool, but like, what would that
yeah.
look like if he was the star of the show?
And I feel like his, whatever he's doing, we never really see what he does. You just know that he's this party guy. It'd probably be really fun TV to like watch him in Vegas as he gets everything set up, to watch him in Tahoe, in Miami, wherever these clubs are, and like meeting, whining and dining people, as apparently he's doing behind the scenes. That could be fun.
I actually think that's a fascinating idea now that I think about it, because I don't think we've really watched, I don't think there are that many mob based shows or movies about somebody who's just terrible at it, but who, by virtue of where he is in the family, like, he maintains power, but he's just kind of a disaster at it. Like, that would be a funny. I think it would have to be some sort of comedic, but like
Yeah, a little bit of a
that could be a
comedy.
fun show.
You call it Fredo, and people just
Yeah,
know, okay, so it's a guy who's part of a powerful family, but he's bad at his job and he's kind of relegated to the side, doing things that don't matter, and he's a party boy. There's a lot of there's some intrigue to that.
I would watch that. I would
Yeah,
watch that. Okay, are any of these an improvement on the film?
I don't think so. This film is just really well done, really creative how they put the two stories together, and it worked so well. Uh, I mean, Fredo as a comedy, I'm open to that, but
I would watch Fredo as a comedy. I would also be happy to watch just the Vito story.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah.
but and I could see the Vito story being just a more enjoyable watch than the Godfather Part Two. But I think just the structural audacity of making the story like this is I don't find the Godfather Part Two the most fun or enjoyable movie to watch, but I do think it's a really interesting, smart kind of story that they're telling, and I think
Mhm.
you would lose a lot if you stripped it of that complexity.
Right. There's just not many movies like this that are done in this way. It's really incredible how they pulled it off.
Yeah. All right, so Godfather 2, neither of us is saying better than Godfather 1, but I would say better than most movies. So
Yeah.
definitely worth watching. Let's not even mention Godfather 3. I think let's just move on.
Oh, is there one? I totally. That's the end of the story, as far as I know.
I mean, there. It's a shame because there are interesting places you could keep going with the story, I guess. Although I
Well, they're
don't know
making this.
because Michael really has sold his soul in a way. Like his family is gone now. His mother has died. He's killed Fredo. Sonny's dead. His father's dead. So it's kind of like isn't this maybe the natural stopping point for the
It
story?
feels like it's over. But where does I haven't seen Godfather 3. Maybe we should discuss it, for a few minutes. I don't know many people are going to watch it. Where does the story go from here? Where can it go? Like he's alone. Where does it what is the third one about?
Basically, it's and I haven't watched it in a little while, but basically it's years later. Michael's much older, and I think it might be told in the present day, like when it was made, which is
Okay, in the
maybe early
70s.
'90s or something.
Oh,
But
it's
it
that far after.
is well. Am I making that up? It's
Let me
much later,
let me double check that. Yeah.
but yeah, 1990.
Wow. Okay,
But
so that is a good distance between
it's
the two.
much later, and it basically is like Michael is much older and he's trying to kind of atone for his sins at the end of his life while also and partially he's doing that by this whole arrangement with the Catholic Church, but it's him kind of trying to like save his soul by doing this deal with the Catholic Church, but then it's also showing corruption within the Catholic Church, and so it's I mean,
Hmm.
there's some really interesting ideas to the movie. I just don't think it works at nearly the same level as these movies.
Well, and, one and two, when you put them together, they feel like a complete story. Like they're done telling this from beginning to end, the Vito to Michael thing. So anything more would feel like an addendum of sorts, of just like, oh, here's some extra stuff Michael did, but it wouldn't connect the same way, same characters.
And I think that's right. I think the story is done at the end of Godfather Part Two, and then three is really just an addendum, and so you can judge it then. It's the return of Jafar to this one's Aladdin. It's not really.
Comes back. Guess what? There's more. All right.
There's more, but really the story has been told. And there we have it. Thanks for joining us for this episode of How to Make Films and Influence People. Check us out at howtomakefilmspodcast.com, and we'll see you next time.